about the 5 civilized tribes?
I know that they were, the Cherokee Nation was one of them.
Cherokee Nation was one of them.
I believe the Seminole.
Seminole is correct. That's right.
I just know that they're the ones who adapted to our
The white culture.
styles.
That's right.
Yeah.
That's right. And Choctaws. Cherokee was the biggest one.
Yeah.
Choctaw was the second largest one. That's what I belong to, is the Choctaw Nation there. Ancestry goes back to David Folsom. And he was actually what they called a half-blood, a half-breed. Now, he led the first band of Choctaws on the Trail of Tears right down this very road, not right next to us, but the next block over there, directly in front of the 1836 courthouse.
Really?
Now, the Choctaw Nation was actually considered one of the stronger economical-wise nations, just because their techniques in agriculture, they could actually grow enough corn to not only supply their nation, but have enough left over to where they could sell it to others, all the way over to the English across the seas. And so they were actually a very profitable nation, that was. And so that kind of set them a little bit higher on the bar there than the rest of the nations altogether. But then, here we got Andrew Jackson. Now, he was considered their brother, because they were brother in arms. They fought, Choctaw sided with them in the War of 1812. And so they kind of respected Andrew Jackson. And then they started getting a lot of push from those settlers coming into what they considered the southeast back then, or the western territories of Mississippi. A lot of citizens started wanting to get that Mississippi land. Prime land, over 32 million acres of Choctaw Nation land is what they were wanting. And little by little, of different negotiations of treaties being signed, they would cede off land little bit by little bit. Now, by 1819, they had ceded approximately 8 million acres of land, which they figured after the signing of Doak-Stan's Treaty, they said this was it. They don't have to worry about ceding any more land, that they had enough. But the chieftain of the time, one of the main chiefs, now there were a number of different chiefs depending on what part of the nation they were actually from. Your southeastern, the Six Towns district, your southern district. But Pushamatah, he knew in the bottom of his heart, even though the treaty said they would never again be bothered with ceding any more land, it was just a matter of time till more land was wanted. And sure enough, that time came. And you had a gentleman, a half-breed named Greenwood LaFleur. Now, he was a chief of one of the northeastern districts. And he pushed to become the overall chief. No more separate chiefs. They wanted one chief to control it all. Because he was in the works along with David Folsom and a lot of the other half-breeds, or half-bloods as they would call them, to sign these treaties, to make sure to get all this land ceded over to the American government for this prime land over in Oklahoma. And, well, part where we're actually right now is what was actually Choctaw land at one point in time. And that's really funny. See, they actually traded this land twice to the Choctaw Nation. Once in the Doak-Stan Treaty, and again in Dancing Rabbit Creek, when they went and met with the agents of the United States government. Greenwood LaFleur was the big advocate for getting this move, because him and David Folsom and quite a few other prominent half-breeds of the time were the ones who were really pushing to cede this land. Not only because they could gain, I believe Mr. LaFleur and Mr. Folsom was giving 4 sections of land over into this new territory, what we call Oklahoma. Actually, it's 2 Choctaw words, Okla and Huma, meaning land of and red. Huma is red and Okla is meaning land of, because that's what they saw whenever they first went over there. Now, Pushamatah at this meeting, a treaty of the Dancing Rabbit Creek, that's when he stood up and stated to Andrew Jackson, he was trying to say, leave this old land behind. This is no good land here in Mississippi, and the best land is over there, what we're trying to give you folks. Well, he stood up and shouted, actually, that they're trying to cheat us. So every time my feet touch this land, they get sorely bruised. So the United States was trying to cheat us here out of that land, because what they were dealing with was prime fertile land down into the Mississippi River Valley. And when they got here, there were barely any trees unless you were in the lowlands, and the ground was just not good enough for farming the way that they actually farmed. But with Greenwood LaFleur and, David Folsom and the Half-Bloods doing a whole lot of pushing to those chieftains, they finally, I guess you could say, lined the pockets of those chieftains just enough to where they finally said, okay, we'll sign these treaties. And not only did they do that to the chieftains, all the sub-chiefs, just 50 of them actually, they gave them sums of money and separate tracts of land for coming on over and convincing the rest of the nation to cede that land. But they were left with an option. They could cede that land, move to this new land of Oklahoma, or they could stay in Mississippi. But if they did that, they were no longer part of the Choctaw Nation. They were actually subject to Mississippi law, which in those days you did not want to be an Indian in Mississippi under Mississippi law, actually. Very harsh treatment there for them. So in 1832, when this Treaty of Dancing Rabbit Creek was finally signed, you had almost a civil war break out in between the half-bloods and the full-bloods. Now David Folsom actually approached them and said, we can either fight amongst ourselves, destroy ourselves from within, or go ahead and take this offer, take what they're giving us here in Oklahoma, remove ourselves. Because in a sense, the removal was not actually a bad thing. They were losing the sense of what they were as a people, their tradition, their culture, their religions, as becoming the civilized tribes as they were trying to do by adapting the white culture, going to the missionary schools. They were losing a lot of their selves, and they could see that. David Folsom was one of the big ones who saw that and convinced a lot of the lessers of the tribes, let's make this move. And so in 1832, and probably around one of the coldest winters ever recorded, they struck out. They started in Vicksburg, Mississippi. They had a number of steamboats down there. Take them right up the Mississippi, up to Arkansas to Little Rock. Boy, once they got down to Vicksburg, the ladies, they weren't getting on that boat. They said, we're not riding no steamboat. And if we're not riding, our children aren't riding. And if I don't know if y'all know where Vicksburg is, but that's a pretty good walk all the way down from Vicksburg, Mississippi up to Little Rock. So from there up to Little Rock and then right down that little road that I was talking about. Down to Trail of Tears is what they called it. And, well, most people associate Trail of Tears with just one little road. That's not true. Just depending on what tribe it was, where they were coming from, and where they were going. Now the Choctaw Nation, the majority of 23,000 of them actually in total made that trek. Now this wasn't done overnight, of course. This was something that took years and years and years, all the way into the 1840s. It was reported from folks here in Washington that they could still have bands of Choctaw Indians walking through their towns. And a lot of times, they were refused to even enter the towns in daylight, because you had malaria breaking out. You have any large group of folks gathered together, malaria was a big problem, and that was a big scare that preceded all the nation on their move. Yeah, all of them were, all the townsfolk, they were fearful that the drunken Indians would come in, get everybody sickened, so they were told to wait outside of town till nightfall, cross right on through town. It was reported you could hear the footfalls going through the town late at night through Washington actually. And the U.S. government, now they said we'll make all the provisions for you folks. Anybody who willingly goes, each man will receive $10, musket, a rifle, different balls, all sorts of gear, blankets, and enough corn to last them for 1 year. And people wonder, well, why did they leave in the middle of the winter? Because they were almost barefooted and barely clothed. Well, that's because by the time they reached Oklahoma, it'd be right at planting season, so they could go ahead and start planting their crops, have that growing, and so they could kind of get the ball rolling on their new civilization once they reached there. And Greenwood LaFleur, now he made it out there, but once all the full-bloods and even the half-breeds found out exactly what he did, manipulated a lot of the chieftains and how he gained profit off of the dire needs of the Choctaw Nation. They say he was actually ran out of Oklahoma, where he went back to Mississippi, where he still actually owned many tracts of land that he was granted for having these treaties signed, and he lived out the rest of his days down in Mississippi. And David Folsom, owning still land over in Mississippi, he stayed in Oklahoma with a number of his people. Now, he came over first off with 752 of his closest friends and family, and led them across the Red River into their new lands. And from there on out, David Folsom, I found many different accounts of, well, he was a good guy and he was a bad guy. But I think he was just a realist. He seen what was going on. He knew that one way or another, the land in Mississippi would be taken over by the settlers. He knew it was time to leave on out. But of course, the land in Oklahoma was nothing like what was promised to him. when they went out and took a look at it, they actually sent out many expeditions to go out and survey this land, but they were all U.S. led, and they come back, of course, talking about a land of honey out there. And well, by the time the Indians got out there, they realized, well, a little too late. The land just not good like they said it was. And all down the trail, they had different people who were supposed to leave out stocks of beef, of corn, for them to make their journeys. But fearing that malaria, they would put that out weeks ahead of time. So once the tribes got there to collect, well, it might not be there, or if it was there, it was rancid, it was rotten, it was no good. And one chieftain of the Cherokee Nation, how we get this name, the Trail of Tears, was asked in Little Rock by a newspaper man, says, "What was your experience on this road like?" And his response was, "It was a road that made me shed tears." And to an Indian, a Native American, especially the men, you did not shed tears at all. It was considered unmanly, I guess you could say, to cry. But the newspaper man, taking that, wordsmithing it, came up with Trail of Tears, and that's how we actually know it today.